Jewish history cannot be fully understood apart from the Gentiles. In fact, Judaism really had no future apart from the Gentiles. And this, according to Paul in Romans, is really interesting because what he's talking about is if you really look at these prophecies, um, God's glory and his will was ultimately going to be found in the faith of of Judaism, right? I mean, and what I mean by ultimately in the faith of Judaism is that there are many, many Jews that simply would not be saved. This is troubling to Paul, no doubt about it, but there's nothing he can do about it. And he makes this very clear. What he wants above even that is to have God's will be done. So he really, in 8 and 9 of Romans, is trying to lay out this history and trying to show in these prophecies that the destiny of Judaism was always found in the Gentiles. Ultimately, that had it not been for the true offspring of Abraham, to quote the text, would have been that Judaism's future would have been like Sodom and Gomorrah, which is what? Total destruction. If you even look back, you're in trouble. So I think there's no escaping that. There's no escaping this understanding of Paul's writing on this. Now, back to kind of what's less germane, but certainly on the table, is our free will, right? I mean, if God prepared these things, where does that leave our personal choice and all that? It's very interesting. I think it's okay when you read this passage to speculate, right? Speculation's fine, but accusation is inappropriate. Paul warns us in the text, you're not to look at God and say, well, wait a minute, hold on. This is wrong, because that's becoming very autocratic, number one. Number two, it's not becoming of someone who seeks after God's will. Now, why is that important? Well, think about Jesus's teachings, right? I mean, if you love Jesus, think about the Lord's Prayer, right? Thy will be done. It precedes almost everything in the text. Now, what is it that Paul is accomplishing here? He is accomplishing the same things that the prophets were accomplishing, the same thing that Jesus was accomplishing, and what apostles ought to be accomplishing. And that is that this understanding that God is in control and that we should just revel in that glory. We should revel in that security that God has given us, and that security is found completely in Him. And if you don't believe me, go back to Matthew and read the Sermon on the Mount. What is it that who's Jesus talking to here? There is no one in the United States of America as poor as those people. I had a beggar at a gas station drive up to me with a smartphone to ask me for money for food. This is a beggar, right? In a car. I mean, but what is Jesus saying to these people? These people don't even have, if they had bait to get a fish, they'd probably eat the bait. I mean, they have nothing. And he says, look at the birds. God takes care of them. Don't worry about what you're supposed to eat. Today's hypersensitive culture would have been and should be, because they're so sensitive about everything, they should be very offended by Jesus's teachings, but they don't actually read Jesus's teachings, and nor are they actually taught Jesus's teachings. If they were, they wouldn't like him. Or the opposite would happen. They would be very influenced by his teachings and would find the things that this current culture finds offensive as kind of silly and childish and unchristian. And yeah, I say unchristian. And yet there are those who are quote unquote in the church who embrace this current ideology. I'm speaking of kind of wokeism that we see going around. And it's shallow and it's I apologize. I don't mean to go on a big rant here. I just want to say it's shallow and it's unbiblical. And if you don't believe me, read the justifications that you see for their positions. Anyway, I didn't mean to spend a lot of time going off on that. I just wanted to say that Romans 8 and 9 has been a real eye opener for me. Of course, I've always known about it, but I've never studied it to preach it. And there's a very big difference between studying something. For example, in the past when I've gone there and studies just looking for answers on free will and predestination and so forth. Now I just want to teach it. I just want to teach the passage. When you teach the passage, it's clear that he's talking about you wanting God's will to be done. Well, guess what? If you really want that, then you have nothing to worry about. And if that's really what you want, is God's will, thy will be done, right? If that's what you want, you have reason today to celebrate. And it doesn't get any better than that for the Christian. These are some of the loftiest passages that the New Testament has to offer in the ultimate joy of the gospel.